rule on the decision of what the Court of Appeals did. We were simply asking them, would you please look at this? And typically, when it deals with a Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court decision to listen to an appeal, they are looking at, do we, as the Michigan Supreme Court, need to identify, is there an important legal issue here? And is there something that we should think about clarifying or doing away with, if you will, that no longer accurately represents Michigan law? And to us, on behalf of all of our clients, but in particular, Buck and Sherry Meir and Chad and Megan Gregory, that answer is resoundingly yes. Not only is this case about what happened that day and holding the school and the school officials responsible, the same folks who were held responsible by the investigation that the school district belatedly paid nearly $3 million for, Guidepost specifically identifying multiple failures and fault, not only with the school itself, but with Hopkins and with EJAC, the folks that had the shooter in their offices only minutes before this tragedy, ultimately giving him back his backpack without searching it. That answer to us, of course, was overwhelmingly yes. And as I'm going to ask my clients to share with you their thoughts or your reactions, because I know that's what folks really want to hear. But I want Chris Desmond, who is the chief appellate attorney here at Ven Johnson Law, and I will tell everyone, not just because Chris is thankfully with our firm and has been for quite a long time, but one of the best and greatest legal minds as it pertains to appellate law in the state of Michigan. Chris, please share a few of your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. I want to first of all echo Ben's sentiments. This is a incredibly sad day in the life of this case. I continue to express my condolences to our clients, and not just our clients, but the other victims of this case. We've been with these families from the very beginning of this, meeting them within weeks of this horrific tragedy over 3 years ago now, and standing by them and trying to fight on their behalf. Just to give people a little bit of an idea of legally what occurred today, when this case went to the Michigan Court of Appeals, it went to the Court of Appeals because litigants have a right to go to the Michigan Court of Appeals when they lose in a Michigan circuit court. And so we did that. You don't have a right to go to the Michigan Supreme Court. You have to ask permission, and you have to ask the court if they'll hear your case. And so that's what we did. And as is somewhat customary with that court, when they deny an order, they don't give you the reasoning behind it. I think one of the important things for this case to, when talking with the media about situations like this, it's sort of an education in the legal process that I think people don't always get. And I don't think that they realize that the Michigan Supreme Court doesn't necessarily have to tell you what they think about a particular case, even if it's one as important as this. Despite the fact that they don't have to do that, obviously, it's still incredibly disappointing that you can have an issue of this type of importance that these families are now left without answers on. I think that Ven invoked the idea of the Guidepost report. The Guidepost report is one of the most difficult things, frankly, that I've ever had to read in my time as a lawyer. And it's not a fun read. I would encourage everybody in this state, and the media in particular, to read that report, to look at what that report says, because none of that evidence was ever permitted to come out in a courtroom in any of the cases that we've filed thus far in this case. Because of the way that governmental immunity operates, courts have essentially deemed that 500 plus pages of independent investigation that gives ample evidence regarding the failures of the Oxford School District is irrelevant to the question of whether they can be held liable. And the reason it's irrelevant in our court's view is because the law simply doesn't allow people like our clients, these victims of this horrific tragedy, to have a day in court when a tragedy like this occurs in a public school as opposed to a private school. We've said it before, but if this event, God forbid, were to happen in a private school, none of what has happened over the course of the last 3.5 years would have happened. This case would have been resolved by now. The courts essentially have said today through this ruling that governmental immunity is not going to change in Michigan by their hand at this stage. And so for people to read the guidepost report and to understand the horrible events that happened here, the avoidable events that happened here, and why there is a complete lack of accountability and liability on behalf of the school, I think what it does is it brings back into focus that we need to start asking for change at other levels. We need to go to our legislature, we need to go to our schools, and we need to start getting answers regarding why events like this can happen without a single policy change taking place in the years since. With that said, I'll turn it back over to Ven. I just want to continue to state to our clients that, we're going to stand behind them and we're going to advocate for them, not just through the court system, but for the change in general that they've been seeking throughout this case. Thank you.
It's important for everyone to understand, as part of our appeal, our seeking the appeal, our application for leave to appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court, we argued a number of different things. Number one, we argued that governmental immunity should absolutely be abolished and ruled unconstitutional. That would throw out the whole thing. Number two, we argued that a particular case, Robinson versus City of Detroit, that really gave governmental immunity its legs as we currently know it back in the Governor Engler era and the Governor Engler court, that we believe set our jurisprudence back decades with that ruling. We asked for that to be reversed. And likewise, we argued what we would say in the alternative, that even if governmental immunity as it currently exists, even if it applies under the facts and circumstances of this case should have been allowed to proceed to trial against EJAC and Hopkins, because we believed we adequately pled and proved, showed enough facts that were in dispute, that it was up to a reasonable jury to decide whether Hopkins and or EJAC could be found to be liable. Obviously, the Michigan Supreme Court issued its ruling by way of saying, we're not persuaded that the questions presented should be reviewed by this court. That's all it said. We have a copy of the order today for all of you, so you can read it for yourself. That's all it said. I want to be very clear. The Michigan Supreme Court, obviously, folks, I've been doing this type of work for almost 40 years now. I do know, I'm honored and privileged to know every member of the Michigan Supreme Court. I respect this Supreme Court. I respect each and every one of the justices that are on the court. I obviously, on behalf of my clients, are extremely disappointed in this ruling. But I think it's probably most important for you all to hear from our clients firsthand. So Buck Meir, if you would like to start us off, please do so. Your reactions to today.
Buck, you're currently muted.
How about now? You got me?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. What's really frustrating about this is, this is just more salt on the wound of how our government has treated us. Over the top disrespectful. Our state representative, Josh Schreiber, mocked our 42 Strong organization that we started. Senator Ruth Johnson got in my face and tried to intimidate me in a meeting when we were trying to educate ourselves on the advocacy stuff for 42 Strong. And she brought the lawsuit up, which I wasn't even there to talk about the lawsuit. Just blatant disrespect to families that have lost a loved one. And, this is just Dana Nessel, our Attorney General, how she just played our community when she had the power to do an investigation all along. She didn't. Why she didn't, it would be a good question to ask her. But all along, our government has played games with this tragedy because they know they can't be held accountable. They're above the law. And what I think is what people need to understand here, when you talk about governmental immunity, I don't think people really understand the level that it's at in Michigan. And it basically, our government's under a different set of laws. They don't operate in the same world as we do. So when you take this tragedy, for example, guess who's been held accountable? The shooter and the parents, right? So the parents were convicted on a proximate cause of death, right? So the government has to be, in order for them to be held accountable, they have to be the cause of death. Think about that and let that sink in. So the only people that the people can be held accountable, the system cannot be held accountable. It's very unfortunate. I don't really, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I can't believe that a tragedy of this nature, our government can just sweep it under the rug and say, sorry for your luck, when it was preventable. There were all the signs in the world. That tells me, with how quick of a decision this was, I mean, there's chatter in the government world that we can't let the truth come out on this, because I think if we let the truth come out on this, it's going to force us to drive change. So when it comes to this immunity thing, so how can we drive the change then? Are we saying that everything was done correctly and they did nothing bad? Like, how do we keep schools from lying on applications like Oxford schools did to get money to implement threat assessment, and they didn't implement it, and they lied on their application and said it was implemented? Like, it wasn't implemented. They didn't have a threat assessment team assembled. They didn't even do a threat assessment, right? But they lied to get the money. So, I mean, what we're witnessing here is a government that is above the law, and they don't have to answer to us. And the only way that we can hold them accountable is through these channels, how we're doing it. And they have immunity. So they have a tool to block us from the tool that we have to hold them accountable. It's crazy if you think about it. It's absolutely insane. I don't know what else to say. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. And there's going to be no change coming out of this tragedy. None. There hasn't been to this point. So now that we can't hold them accountable, now think about this. So there's two ways we could that can drive change, which is legislatively, and then through the insurance company, right? Because this is all about money and power, right? So what's this going to do with the insurance company now, right? So the government's saying, no, we're not going to change. You can't force us to change. Go away. All right, so what's the insurance company going to say now? Well, we're off the hook here. So no change is going to get driven here. with this decision by the Supreme Court. It's unfortunate.
Thank you, Buck. Megan Gregory, on behalf of Keegan and of course your family, you, Chad, your reaction to the court's order today.
I think for me, it was just extremely disheartening when I heard that they decided to dismiss it. For us, I know, to piggyback off of Buck, one of our main goals was we need to find out what the truth is so that we can force change. So no one else has to go through what all of us have been through. And the fact that they won't even listen to the evidence so that we can have that day and get the truth and then push for the change, it just was a huge blow. I don't know. I mean, I think we're all still kind of just trying to process that they won't even listen to our case. You know, this was a mass casualty. This was a huge deal. And the fact they don't seem to care is just, it's really disheartening.
Thank you, Megan. And again, I want to reiterate before we go to questions from the press, today's ruling was not, quote, on the merits, end quote. That simply means we were not asking the Supreme Court to reverse the Court of Appeals yet. We were simply asking, will you please listen to the case? So sadly, the answer is a resounding no. There are a couple other avenues. I'll be discussing those. We will be discussing those with our clients later. Without any question, this is a severe blow to the case and will be extremely difficult to overcome. We'll talk about a couple more things that we can potentially do, but right now it's obviously very, very sad time, as I said. So folks, if you want to ask questions, we'll do our best to answer.
Thank you all. This is from Courtney Bennett. What can be done to continue to push for change? Is it addressing lawmakers in Lansing?
Courtney, the question is a great one. Right now, since, of course, there's three branches of the government, the executive is Governor Whitmer. She can't just write a law. That's not her job. The court has decided not to look at the law that's already been written. So that's the second branch. The third branch, of course, yes, it's the legislature. But don't forget, the legislature is the one that passed the law and put it into effect way back when in the 80s. And it really never got its legs until, like I told you, the Engler, Michigan Supreme Court in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we believe overwhelmingly the pendulum has swung way too far to the right and absolutely has made it virtually impossible to sustain a governmental immunity case for anyone to be held responsible, even if they're injured or killed by a governmental employee. So we believe that's the most likely solution, but you're asking a body of legislators who can't agree on much ever to agree on this and to set aside the fact that if there's no more governmental immunity, they could be sued for injuring or killing somebody through their negligence. So it certainly sounds like it's against their own self-interest. And that's exactly what is most troubling about this from a legislative standpoint.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I want to chime in on that real quick. At the end of the day, our government is aligned on one thing. The right and the left are aligned on one thing, and that's immunity. Period. End of story.
Because why, Buck? Tell them.
Why are they aligned on it?
Yeah.
Because they don't have to be accountable to run a good business.
It protects them.
Yep.
Next question, please.
Question from Lily Altavina of the Detroit Free Press. Can you detail the other legal avenues with the federal case being dismissed?
Lily, the federal case was dismissed by the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati a few weeks ago. They reversed in part and affirmed in part Judge Goldsmith's ruling. Judge Goldsmith, in essence, allowed us to at least proceed toward trial on Hopkins, EJAC, and I think the school district off the top of my head, I'd have to look at it again. And the Sixth Circuit said, no, those folks get out too. So with the Federal Court of Appeals ruling that, there is no United States Supreme Court ruling to be had in a case like this. In my opinion, this United States Supreme Court is even more conservative on these issues than our Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. So again, there's a couple more things we could talk about there, but likely that's over. There's one other aspect of the state court action, a constitutional claim that is still technically active, but unlikely at this point. So we're going to review with our clients. Obviously, we will make a formal announcement. I know that one of the things that we have been talking about with our clients is a march on Lansing. I cannot think of a more important topic than school safety, public school safety, accountability of our government to us when they injure, maim, and or kill our loved ones. I can't think of a more important topic for the people of the state of Michigan to agree on, irrespective of one's party affiliation or none. So we will be certainly thinking about and potentially planning a rally on the Capitol steps, but we will solidify those and make those known at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Another question from Lily for Buck and Megan. How have these years of pursuing legal action impacted you and your families?
It's exhausting, obviously, but we're going to fight for what we believe in. And I think it's taught us and our kids the importance of driving change and the reason behind the lawsuit. So I think it's definitely been a long road, and I think we had high hopes that we would at least get the truth out of everyone at this point. But, you know, it's our whole goal is to make schools safer and not have to witness other schools going through this, which unfortunately we've already seen some of the exact same mistakes made in some of the more recent school shootings. And I think that's really hard to swallow when we know we could help in one respect and get this out there on a more national level so people will make the changes that are necessary.
Thank you, Megan. Buck, anything to add to that?
You know, I wish I could. I would never want anybody to walk in these shoes that we're walking in. That's why we want there to be change. You know, in fact, this has been taxing on our family, not only with the loss of Tate, but dealing with this BS with our government. And, you know, my oldest boy said something to me a couple weeks ago. And he basically asked, who are you? Right? Like, you're mad at the world. And I guess hearing that from one of your kids is, I guess, could sum it up in how it's affected our family.
Thank you. Question for Ven. What's next? Are we all supposed to wait until the next school shooting and expect no one to be held accountable? Second part of this question, is Dana Nessel now off the hook on doing an investigation?
Wow, those are some great questions. The thing that I'm proudest of are these clients lost so much of who they are, of what they are, and what they thought about us as a people, a resident of Oxford. All of them were so proud of their school. of their community, being in Michigan, being a U.S. citizen. And the most difficult part of all of this, the tragedy, of course, of each and every life that were lost and all the injuries that happened so needlessly. But to watch them go through this process and not obtain justice in the civil arena is so hurtful for somebody that has dedicated my life and career to civil justice and jurisprudence. I feel horrible. I feel absolutely horrible that the type of work that I do let these poor folks down. And I don't know what to say. I know this, that each and every one of them have done every single thing that they can possibly do to hold these folks accountable so that it doesn't happen again. And the last thing that any one of them would want, despite these difficult court battles and difficult losses, the last thing that any one of them would want is another school shooting. And the sad reality is, by holding people accountable and going through publicly all the things that were done wrong, would aid future folks in these positions from hopefully to make better decisions to prevent many future such tragedies. So that's all these folks wanted, and that it kills me that we don't have that for them. The next exact step, I don't have an answer for you. Obviously, we got this ruling today. We'll be reviewing it and discussing it internally. We'll be making formal recommendations to our clients, and then what those outcomes are, we will, of course, share publicly what our plan is.
About Dana.
Well, I think that there's no one better to talk about Attorney General Nessel's investigation into this than Buck Mears. So, Buck, please.
I think that's a good question, whether it lets her off the hook or not. I think she's going to do it because she came on camera after we forced her and said she would do it. But she's not going to do a bang-out job on it. There's no reason for her to do a bang-out job and waste time and resources, because it's not going to lead to anything. They have immunity. They don't have to change, right? So, yeah, she's actually one of the most disappointing one in all of this, because she had power from the get-go. She had jurisdiction from the get-go to do an investigation. And she kept hiding behind the school board saying no, which she didn't need an invitation. So, yeah, it's really unfortunate. Not a fan of Dana Nessel. And she's also attacked me personally. Another person from government that's attacked me personally.
Thank you, Buck. This is a question for both Buck and Megan. Beyond the courts, what changes do you hope to see in school safety or accountability to prevent future tragedies?
Well, I think it's important, first and foremost, to follow policy. If you have threat assessment in place, you follow it. One of the big failures in ours was he said that he didn't think it was, he thought it was suicide ideation, yet he just let him go back to class. One of the first things you're supposed to ask is, do you have any, weapons or anything that can harm you? None of that was done. Right there could have just negated the whole situation. So I think that somehow with threat assessment in place, if we can get it in place in all schools, somehow it needs to be followed. And if it's not followed, they need to be held accountable. So, ours accepted a grant and said it was in place, but it wasn't. And so for our school, now they're not going to be held accountable. Why would we change? So I think it's just important that people do start being held accountable. That's the only way we're going to see a change in any of these things.
Thank you, Megan. Buck, anything on that?
Wow, actually, I could ramble on for 10 minutes on that one, but I mean, at the end of the day, nothing's going to change because of immunity. Like, I think there's a great opportunity here. I've talked about this great idea of kind of using a dashboard, kind of what we do in the private sector, where you can, all this data, schools are already collecting a ton of data, and it's attendance, grades, disciplinary action, participation in activities, you name it. They're collecting all this data. Well, our idea on this is design up a school safety support system that is, that you can input all this data in, and you can monitor your student population's well-being in a very techie way. And what it does is it'll show when a kid is entering crisis and drops below what the median is, right? And that's when you go out. That's when a counselor can go out and make an intervention and do a check-in. We do it with 42 strong with one data point with well-being surveys. So there's a better way to do this. Hiring more counselors. What's that do? That does nothing, right? And plus there's no counselors to hire. So, I think that idea right there is an incredible idea to put in our mental health crisis that our youth are going through right now. Let's find a way to be more efficient and get better at monitoring how kids are monitoring their well-being. That could be some positive change from this. But to do that, that would be no good if immunity, because let's say a school implements that, right? Well, if they missed it and there was a tragedy, doesn't matter. They have immunity, right? So I think at the end of the day, it gets down to, we got to address this immunity thing. Like our government's not above the law. They're not. They live in the same world that we live in. They need to operate in the same world that we operate in. It's as simple as that.
I think it's really important for everyone to remember, because both Buck and Megan have mentioned it today, there actually was a threat assessment, if you will, a test that the shooter was given over the course of 2 years. In the year of the shooting, he registered high, meaning high indicia of suspicion, of problems. And allegedly, no one reviewed his scoring before the shooting, despite the fact that the school year had been underway for over 2 months. Let's not even get into the drawings that have now become literally shared nationwide about a handgun and shooting somebody and someone bleeding to death, and searching on his cell phone about bullets in class, watching a violent movie with folks being killed in class. These are within 48 or 24 hours of this shooting. A second drawing that most of you don't know about, that we had access to because of depositions, that was written with another gun pointed at a person in a school assignment that allegedly wasn't reviewed. So all of these things already existed, and what happened here is they were all systematically and systemically neglected and ignored, and yet no one is being held accountable.
I think one thing we should also note, in addition to what you were just saying, is that the shooter himself, for those who attended the Miller hearing, which was a brutal week of court where these victims were all talking about the way that this has impacted them, the shooter himself, through his psychologist that was in jail, he told that psychologist that he was certain that when he was in that counselor's office and he saw them walking in with that backpack, that it was finally over, that it was done, because certainly they were going to search that backpack. They were going to find out what was going on, and he'd be stopped. That's of course not what
going
happened.
to stop him.
That's right. He was certain that the adults in the room were going to do the right thing and stop him. And again, as explained in the guidepost report, and we don't need the guidepost report to know this, that's obviously not what happened, despite the fact that there were policies in place from Oxford School District that required certain actions to be taken at that time that weren't.
Last thing I want to make sure everyone understands, when Buck and Megan have been talking about the funding, the school asked for funding for threat assessment, said that it was in fact implemented and in place and being utilized, and therefore the school district received governmental funds because of that. And then yet this happens, and when it does happen, there's no internal real review of anything of what they knew and didn't know. So again, these are all bits and parts of pieces of evidence that we believe merited our client's day in court. So last couple of questions, please.
Thank you, Ven. I believe that concludes questions, so I'd like to open it up for final thoughts from the four of you.
I'm going to start or finish with how I started. Today is a really sad day in Michigan as it relates to justice for Michigan residents, but especially folks who send their kids to public schools, just like similar to one that I grew up in so many years ago, and my parents were both public school teachers. It's shameful that this tragedy can happen and there be no civil recourse whatsoever because the folks who neglected their duties under the law work for the government. So much like Buck has been saying all day, government now in Michigan, if you work for the government, injure or kill somebody, you are above the law. You don't have to worry about being held accountable, and therefore no one will ever learn from these past mistakes to use that as future hopeful ways to prevent tragedies, not just in school shootings, but in other areas. And that makes me really sad.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, I want to point out to people something that I think was brought up a little bit earlier, but that's that, Buck and Sherry don't need to be doing what they're doing right now from a legal standpoint. Megan and Chad and our other clients, they don't have to be out there fighting for change right now. Is one of the questions really astutely asked when they asked how this has affected them and this process of this lawsuit has affected them. It's been difficult, and I think anybody would understand that something like this would be difficult. But despite that difficulty, they're doing what they're doing, not because it's going to benefit them at this point. Their families have already gone through tragedies. They're doing it because there are a lot of other people out there that still face risks because of the lack of change that has occurred in this state and nationwide to this epidemic that we've been facing. You're seeing a small snapshot today in this press conference of the way that real people get impacted by these events. There are families in Connecticut and Georgia and Texas and Florida and Colorado and pretty much every state there is right now. This has played out in those communities. And when it plays out, it ripples out far wider than people realizes and far beyond the people who were directly injured in the school that day. And so I just want to thank them for all the efforts that they have voluntarily endured and subjected themselves to try to bring more safety, whether it's through things like 42 Strong and the counseling efforts that Buck and Sherry have been dedicated to, or other programs that they've been committed to. These are people who are working for the rest of us, and they're doing so at great expense to themselves. So I think we all owe all of them a debt of real gratitude.
Thank you, Chris. Megan?
I mean, I just think, to reiterate, these kids deserve justice. Justin, Tate, Madison, and Hannah, their lives mattered, and it's frustrating to see that there's no accountability. There's, 1,800 kids that are struggling daily, that their lives are important. They want to be successful, and there's still no accountability. So I think people need to just recognize that they need validation, justice, and accountability.
Thank you, Megan. Buck?
Chris, first of all, I want to thank you for what you said, because we are trying to really take this tragedy and drive some change. There's a connectedness issue with kids these days, and all we're trying to do is drive some connection in our world and make it a better place so that it's safer, right? But at the end of the day, I think with this decision today, it's our government saying nothing's going to change. We don't have to change, and we're willing to sacrifice kids as a gun statistic to keep doing what we're doing, because that's basically what the decision today said, is your kid's just a gun statistic. We don't need to change a damn thing.
Thank you, Buck. And thank you for your comments today. Thank you, media, for attending today's press conference. That will conclude today's press conference. If you have any questions or would like to set up any one-on-one interviews, you can reach out to Chelsea Heckathorn of Near Perfect Media, chelsea@nearperfectmedia.com. Recording of this press conference will be sent after the fact via email. Thank you again for your time.